first question is just like as a background for all the people watching this, could you tell us about Tabletop Farm?
Yeah, sure. On in the fall of 2009, I started Tabletop Farm here in Point Reyes Station after being given some or offered the use of some land, about an acre. And I was working full time as a soil scientist at the time. And so I just thought it'd be a fun thing to do as kind of like more of a hobby. And I was doing everything by hand. So I quickly realized though that I needed some people to buy my produce once I started growing it. And so I got the neighborhood involved and signed up for boxes of produce every week for as long as I had them. And I was still working full time, and I was the senior project manager for my company that I worked for in Point Richmond. So I'd get up at 4 in the morning and I'd work from about 4:30 until about 8, and then I get to work at 9 because I had an hour commute. And then I get back around 4, and then or 4:30, and then I do a little bit of work online for an hour or so or less, and then I'd go straight to the farm and work until sundown. And I just loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And about 2 years later, I went part-time and with my job. And then a year after that, I could leave my job after I had kind of invested in things like a tractor and fencing and got a lot more land. And so now we farm on about 10 acres per year, but we have about 20 acres to use. And the farm is based on the model of rotational crops with a heavy amount of diversity to offset some of the potential issues of disease and pests that might happen if we didn't do that. And we're geographically, separated from different plots that we have, so we can grow crops that are more beneficial for certain soil types and certain locations, topography, and all that. And I grow year round. The winter time, we grow a lot of crops in the winter now, especially because the climate tends to be a little more droughty. We've had 3 droughts in the last 10 years. And the first 3 years was a drought the entire time that I started farming, and considered a drought. And so I kind of cut my teeth in a drought, and I've been farming with the intention the entire time of using less and less water. And the water use this year is about we're about, I'd say, probably 10% of the water that we started using, which is a huge decrease. And one of the main driver for me is economic. I mean, I care about water too, but it costs a lot to water the crops. And so if I can water less, I can save money. And so I think that's been a good incentive to use less water. And that just means more water for others and water for wildlife, and the creeks stay moist, and that's important. And so the other facet of the farm is that, especially recently, the majority of our produce goes to locals instead of folks that live outside of the community. And so more and more the produce that we grow is consumed here, and that helps with the sustainability aspects in a big way. Just to make it work, for about 7 or 8 years, I was selling 70% of my produce to restaurants and grocery stores outside of the area. And that was beneficial in some ways because I could move a lot of produce, but it was also not so great in other ways because it meant a lot of driving time and delivery time and time away from the farm. And then there's costs associated with that for fuel and packaging and a lot of time coordinating with buyers every week. And so I'd be on my tractor or just out in the field and then just like texting all the time. So now it's just nice to not have to do that. I have 2 honor system farm stands, and which you all are very familiar with. Um, and then we have a CSA that just started this week. And I'm bummed that you weren't able to be there for the CSA, but it was great to have the first CSA harvest, and we harvested strawberries, chard, kale, red onions for that first box, and we put a newsletter in each box. About 30 members this year, and we'll probably go up to about 40 in about a month, and we have a waiting list. Last year we had 80 members, and so twice as many, but I didn't really like the way it felt. Having 80 was just too cumbersome, and a lot of people were kind of, it was hard to manage, that many people actually. So with the 2 honor system farm stands and the small CSA, it's been more manageable. I think for me, the best thing, the thing I like about farming the way I do it anyway, is that it's a lifestyle choice, and I appreciate the time that I have to do the work that I do. I also appreciate the time that I have off the farm, and I think it's very easy to get into farming, and it can be all consuming for one's energy, and so I don't think that's very sustainable on the long term for anybody, and I have 2 small children and a family, so it's important to me that I spend time with them and have a high quality of life at the same time that I'm producing vegetables for eating. And I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, thanks for telling us about the farm a little bit more. We noticed that you also touched on doing some research on the farm. Could you tell us what you do and what you hope your research will achieve?
Of course, yeah. I just started doing some research as part of a master's in science program at Humboldt State University. And my research is on organic matter that's derived from cover crops, which are crops that you grow to till back into the soil. There's a lot of benefits of cover crops, including improved soil health, plant and disease management, increasing the amount of beneficial insects on the farm, and increasing microbial diversity. Other ones, some of the effects have to do with soil, decreasing soil erosion and helping to improve infiltration of the rainfall, and creating basically like a sponge so that the soil really absorbs the most amount of water when it rains, and holding on to that water. But one thing that hasn't been investigated is the potential for a cover crop to quote unquote bioremediate the soil if there's heavy metals or metals. And one thing that we have that's very common in Northern California are soils that have a pH that's lower than 5.5. What that means is, because most soils have clay in them, and clay is aluminosilicate complex, is what it's made up of, crystalline mineral complex, that the aluminum in that complex starts to actually break down and degrade and come into solution, so it becomes soluble in the soil, and can be taken up by plants, and then can be consumed even by humans or animals. Can be an issue with wildlife and in the watershed. And so my specific line of research has to do with understanding whether increasing the organic matter in the soil by using more cover crops can help to decrease the amount of available aluminum in the soil that has a low pH. And so we're finding that out.
Nice. Thanks for sharing.
Mhm.
And then another question that we had about tabletop was like, what makes it sustainable versus unsustainable? And what do you do to like make it more sustainable?
That's a great question. So some of the practices that we do at Tabletop Farm that would hopefully make it more sustainable are like I mentioned, using we're growing crops for our local community, and the main thing that helps with that is what are called food miles, and which is kind of a calculated number that has to do with the amount of miles that food travels before it gets to its plate or ends up in the final destination. And if you look at a map of how much or where the food goes before it actually gets there, the majority of it travels something like between 1,000 and 1,500 miles before it actually gets to the place that it's consumed. And then half of it is wasted. And so those two things alone make our entire food system, whether it's organic or not, unsustainable. And it's pretty hard to argue with that. So if you can figure out how to minimize food miles and decrease food waste or increase food use, then you're increasing the efficiency of the food system in a huge amount. And so what Tabletop Farm strives to do is like create the food miles become an average of about 5. So the food miles go from 1,500 to 5, and that's just a huge increase in efficiency right there. And then decreased food waste to almost 0. Like I think we talked a lot about when you were there on the farm, the amount of zucchini that we waste every year, and that's almost all of it. We waste a few strawberries and a few cherry tomatoes out in the field, and then there's some things that just don't get harvested because they're not marketable, or it's at the end of their life cycle, and then we till them back in. But on the whole, the food that we harvest gets used and gets eaten, and it has an economic benefit for the farm as well. So it's not just we're constantly giving food away either, which is part of the sustainability that we're able to sustain as a business in this economy. And so that's another thing. So those are 2 big structural things that we do. Aside from those things, we do a lot of practices that are, kind of agroecological practices, meaning we use cover crops, like I mentioned. We have a lot of crop rotation, meaning that we don't grow the same crops year after year in the same place. We grow small blocks of crops to confuse the pests, to decrease disease, where you might have like powdery mildew, for example, on cucumbers. And if you grew that even downwind, in the year after, you'd still probably have powdery mildew, if you grew it 200 feet away. But we change it up by growing it on a whole nother plot that's like a mile away. And so we have a lot less disease because of that. We grow crops that are appropriate to our place, meaning we don't have to expend a lot of energy in order to grow them. We don't do a lot of interventions like, well, obviously, because we're certified organic, we never use pesticides or herbicides or any chemicals, really. Probably the most intensive fertilizer that we use is a product that we just started buying that's made out of blood meal and bone meal, which are sources of nitrogen and phosphorus. And that's important for us to have those sources. But we also have a lot of horse manure that is just a local resource, because there's so many horse farms and horse owners, horse ranches around here. And so we use that resource. And in addition to that, we save the food scraps from local restaurants, the Cowgirl Creamery and the Bovine Bakery. If any of you have ever been there, you'll know that all of the food waste from the kitchen goes into barrels, and those barrels get collected by us, and then we make compost out of them. And Olivia and Sophia and Matthew, you are all I got the pleasure of shoveling that and throwing it around on the field. And that's a really great nutritious soil amendment. And we're kind of recycling it so that it's not just going to a landfill. Using a greenhouse is a really big sustainability thing. If you think about what a greenhouse does, it doesn't just make things hot, but it enables us to grow our transplants out of season, basically, meaning that we can grow thousands of transplants that would otherwise be grown in the field by seed, and in a condition that maybe the field's not ready for. So, for example, we can start our Swiss chard in the greenhouse and save about a month of time doing that. Save thousands of gallons of water doing it like that, rather than irrigating in the field, and save a lot of seed doing that as well, because it's so much more efficient. You lose less seed, and then save a lot of labor, because it's much easier to grow the seeds in the greenhouse and then transplant them out than have to weed all of that ground and have to thin all those seeds and have to water all that, irrigate it, and make sure it grows really well. And so we save a lot of energy doing it with the greenhouse and all those other things: water, seed, time, labor. There's a big list of things that the farm does that are kind of sustainable. Some of the things I think that are interesting, though, that I've grappled with a lot that I don't think are sustainable, that are part of, I think that's like in a way more of an interesting question, because like a lot of organic farmers strive for sustainability, but some of the things that are kind of baked into the economic system of our agricultural, kind of culture, have to do with production and production efficiencies. And so, like using a tractor, for example, that's a hugely unsustainable thing, because all of the parts that go into building that tractor, all of the metals that get mined in unknown locations, and the fuel that the tractor uses, even though it's pretty efficient as a thing, as a machine, it's very efficient. I question whether it's very sustainable to be using a tractor to plow up a bunch of land to plant crops. It seems like the more sustainable thing would be to use either human labor or animal labor in order to do that. But economically, it's hard to produce enough to satisfy the needs of a family by just doing it with hand labor or animal labor. So I haven't gone that route, although I've tried, and I apprenticed actually on a farm for 2 years that we just used horses to pull plows and to do a lot of the hard work, which I loved, but it'd be hard to replicate that. And I, use our truck to get around and things like that. So, but I think the last thing, though, just to get back to the sustainable thing, is we really do a lot to improve the soil. And our organic matter, as an indicator of sustainable, of how healthy our soil is, has gone from 3% to 6% or even higher. And that percentage is very significant, because the organic matter can hold a lot of moisture, can move nutrients around and as a reservoir for nutrients, and can hold on to the nutrients more efficiently. So when we apply all that compost that y'all were applying there on the farm, it tends to stay in the soil rather than get leached out or blown off or eroded in some way. And so increasing the health of the soil is ultimately the most important thing that I think we do for the farm, because we can keep growing like this forever, as long as we're alive. And we're not gonna see like an overall reduction in yield. And and it's appropriate for our place and our scale and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So back to like more of the economic side of running a farm. We did some background research on the monopoly causing an inflated price of seeds. And how does this impact you? And does it make it difficult for tabletop to make a profit?
Yeah, another great question. So well, with organic seeds, there has been a decrease in the overall availability of varieties. And there's been a lot more emphasis on hybridization for production and commercial production. So that in of itself reduces the amount of just diversity in seeds. And then there's also been kind of at the same time a push to or maybe interest in heirloom seeds. So there's still some varieties that are out there that are really great varieties of heirloom seeds, but from a commercial point of view, it's a little harder to grow heirloom seeds because they're less reliable, and I mean, if you just buy them and grow them. But one thing that we've been doing is saving our own seed, and I don't think when you were here we saved any broccoli seed, but we're just about to. We have one row of broccoli seed that we saved back every year. So we let the plants go to flower, and then they start making seeds, and then we save all those seeds. And year after year, we've done this. This is the 6th year that we've saved this one particular variety of broccoli. So it's becoming more like broccoli that is from here rather than from somewhere else. And we've noticed that we can grow the broccoli into warmer periods of weather, which is one thing. Usually broccoli will start to bolt or flower in the warmer weather, but this kind of broccoli doesn't do that as much. It produces like a lot of broccoli, which is the reason why I saved it in the first place. And so that's one example. There's a few things like that, like beans and peas. We like to try to save some of those. Lettuce seeds, we like to try to save some of those if we can. And just to acclimate or adapt those seeds to our climate and our growing conditions. And that's the thing that I feel like farmers can do, and even gardeners can do in their backyard, to counteract some of those pressures that are because of the economy or because of corporate interests, decreasing the diversity of the seed collection that's out there in the world. And some of the issues around patenting of seeds is very concerning, and it's concerning to everyone, from the people who eat the food to the people who grow the food, and also to the scientists who are working on the varieties. Because in the past, one of the great things about being a geneticist or a breeder, a plant breeder, is that it's been, I mean, not in the distant past, but before about 20 years ago, a lot of the varieties that were out there were considered kind of like what would be called open source nowadays, but in the commons. So free in a way. You can reproduce it or use some of that genetic information on your own. But with patenting becoming much more of an issue and a constraint on that, there's been less work on breeding, actually. And the breeding that has been done is much more focused on very large scale, industrial scale, commercial farms. And where we fit in with that is that our scale is such that we have to grow food that is going to have a reliable harvest, and it's going to be reliably delicious and well adapted to our climate. But we don't necessarily need things like that are really easy to harvest with like a big tractor, or like a machine comes through with, like specialized cutting equipment. And so those aren't the varieties we're interested in anyway. And so the concern is that if all of the effort and money and in research is going into varieties that are like that, we're not going to get, us small farmers aren't going to get the benefit of any new varieties if there isn't as many researchers working on new varieties that might have something like the ability to withstand hotter temperatures, or the ability to have the same harvest with a smaller amount of water or irrigation and things like that. So we have to do it ourselves, kind of, as farmers or gardeners.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question that we had is, do you think it's important for people to know where their food comes from? And if so, why do you think that it's important?
Great. Yeah. I think that the benefit of knowing where your food comes from is having a relationship to the source of what sustains us. And if it's abstract and unknown, it's pretty hard to have an appreciation for that which sustains us. And so the food is one thing that sustains us, but what really sustains us is all the stuff that goes into the food. And so that's the nutrients in the soil and the water and the people and that grow that. And I remember growing up and thinking, like, why isn't food free? It's like such a basic human need. Why don't we just have free food? And then becoming a farmer and realizing, oh, I know why we don't have free food, because it takes a lot of work to produce food. It takes a ton of energy and work and effort to produce food. And that appreciation, I mean, just to tie it together, for me was a wake up, because I realized that I can't take food for granted. That I have to understand that food isn't free. If it were free, it would have to be somehow subsidized, or be a trade-off. And that health, as far as human experience goes, is the most important thing that we can have. If we don't have health, we don't really have very much, and there's always a struggle. And so having a connection to your food or where it comes from goes to the core of health, and not just human health or like the health of your body, but the health of the planet, and the health of communities, and the health of culture. All those things that go into growing food, and then also probably the health of local economies, maybe not like national economies, but there's probably a lot more that can be said about why it's important to have a connection. But those are the things that come to my mind that are probably the most important to me.
Okay. Okay, our next question is, what change would you like to see in food systems?
Yeah, I love that question. I would like to see a lot more farmers, and I would like to see a lot more farmers in just more widespread locations, rather than all concentrated in the Salinas Valley or in the Central Valley, or quote unquote agricultural regions. I would like to see more farms spread out all across where people live, and I'd like to see on those farms crops that are grown that are appropriate to those places. That way, we have a more even kind of workforce, in a way of thinking about it, who are connected to our food system. And the food that is produced doesn't necessarily have to go so far to get to the place where it's consumed. There might be some streamline inefficiencies in doing it that way if we have a centralized management system of the food system, meaning like that the United States Department of Agriculture might have a little bit less ability to manage a food system like that, rather than a food system where all the corn comes from, the Corn Belt, and all the wheat comes from the Palouse Prairie, that kind of thing. Which, we might not lose that in the system that I'm talking about either, but we would have much more of the fresh produce, and maybe even a whole bunch of different things that we're not even having access to if our food system was much more diffuse throughout the geography of our country and of our world. And in fact, prior to the Industrial Revolution and to the Green Revolution in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was more diffuse. And it was something like 1 in 10 people had a direct connection to a farm or to a family farm. And now it's something like 1 in 1,000 or even higher. And I believe it's 0.1% of the population actually has a stake in the economy of agriculture, or our farmers. And it's just decreasing, every decade by huge amounts. So I'd like to see it get back a little bit more to 10% of the population being involved in agriculture. I think that would be really beneficial.
Thank you. That was a really good answer. And then the last question is more of just like a fun question. But it's just like, what is your favorite part about tabletop and just working at a farm in general?
Yeah, that is a fun question. I love being there. I just love seeing the seasons change at every one of our plots. And sometimes I feel like my farm gets so complicated because there are, like 4 places or 5, depending on how you count them, or even 6, depending on how you count them. So you have sheep too. And, and I sometimes forget that like one place is so great. Sometimes there's some, sometimes the year, like in the spring or the winter, some places really have their beauty, and just the views and the feel of the bay, wind, or the air, the smell in the air in the spring with the fresh grass. And I love the mornings, getting up really early and being there and hearing the birds come out. And I think it's a toss-up between after the sun has gone down and the owls are starting to come out, and the herons are feeding their babies and kind of putting them to sleep, and you can hear them in the trees. And I think that kind of experience, I don't know what I would do without that experience sometimes, because it's such a solace for me in kind of a difficult world. And I that's the thing that I love though about farming in general, is just that I do have a connection to this place, and I have a connection in history. It's been more than 10 years now. So for me to see the changes over the years, and to be a real part of that has been gratifying, and also deeply nurturing for me, for my soul. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Those are all
you.
the questions.